One move, just one tiny movement at over 200 kilometers per hour, almost ended a Formula One career in a fraction of a second. And what Formula One discovered after that crash is now scaring the entire grid. Because this was not just a driver mistake. This was not just a racing incident. This was a system failure, happening in real time, at full speed. Bearman hit the wall with a force so extreme, it reached 50 times the weight of his own body. And somehow, that's not even the most shocking part. Because moments before the impact, something inside another car changed direction on its own. No warning. No control. No time to react. And now insiders are asking a question that could change the future of Formula One forever. What if drivers are no longer fully in control? Stay with me, and subscribe to the channel, because what really happened at Suzuka only gets worse the deeper you go. At first, nothing felt unusual. That's what makes this so dangerous. Because if you go back and watch the race from the beginning, everything looks completely under control. Antonelli was leading with confidence. The pace was consistent. Strategies were playing out exactly as expected. No chaos. No warning signs. No indication that, just minutes later, one of the most violent moments of the season was about to unfold. And this is where people miss the first key detail. Because the real story didn't start at the crash. It started laps before. Quietly. Almost invisibly. Bearman was already building pressure. Not aggressively. Not recklessly. But intelligently. He was studying the car ahead. Watching its behavior. Noticing small inconsistencies. Tiny variations in speed. Moments where the Alpine didn't accelerate the way it should. At first, it didn't look like a problem. Just normal race variation. Fuel load. Tire wear. Energy deployment. But here's where things begin to shift. Because those small inconsistencies were not random. They were building towards something. And Bearman, without knowing it, was driving straight into that pattern. Lap after lap, he got closer. The gap shrinking. The confidence growing. Until he reached a point where the overtake was no longer a question of if, but when. And he chose Spoon Corner. Now this is important. Because Spoon is not a place where drivers take unnecessary risks. It's fast. Technical. Demanding. You commit, or you don't go at all. Which tells you something very important about Bearman's mindset in that moment. He trusted what he was seeing. He trusted the behavior of the car ahead. He believed it would remain consistent. Predictable. Stable. But that assumption is exactly what failed him. Because just before the braking phase, something changed. And almost nobody noticed it in real time. The Alpine didn't just slow down. It hesitated. A subtle delay in power delivery. A slight drop in speed that didn't match the previous laps. And in Formula One, that kind of inconsistency is everything. Because drivers calculate movements based on precision. On expectation. On patterns. And when that pattern breaks, even by a fraction, it creates a chain reaction. This is where the situation becomes irreversible. Bearman was already committed. Already positioned. Already closing in at a speed difference that left no margin for hesitation. And then, the unexpected happened. But here's the part that changes how you see everything. This wasn't just about two cars on track. This was about something building beneath the surface. Something teams had been quietly discussing. Something most fans never heard about. And something that, in that exact moment, was about to reveal itself in the worst possible way. Because what happened next was not supposed to happen at all. Because in Formula One, there is one rule every driver depends on. The car in front must behave predictably. Not perfectly. Not identically every lap. But predictably. And at Suzuka, that rule was broken. Right at the worst possible moment. As Bearman committed to the inside line, he had already made the calculation. Speed. Angle. Braking point. Everything was aligned. Everything made sense. Until, suddenly, it didn't. Because the Alpine ahead didn't just lose speed again. It reacted. And that reaction was not smooth. Not controlled. It shifted slightly toward the center of the track. Not a dramatic move. Not an obvious block. Just enough. Just enough to close the space that Bearman was already using. And at over 200 kilometers per hour, that space is everything. That space is survival. And in that exact instant, it disappeared. Now here's where the situation becomes impossible. Because people often ask, why didn't he just brake? Why didn't he back out? But that question ignores the reality of that corner. At that speed, on that line, there is no safe braking option. If he brakes hard, he risks going straight into the back of the Alpine. A direct impact. Full speed. No protection. So instead, he chooses the only option left. He moves right. Away from the car. away from the collision, but directly toward the edge of the track. And this is the moment where control ends. The second those tires touched the grass, grip vanished instantly. No warning, no gradual loss, just gone. The steering becomes useless. The car no longer responds, and in less than a second, Bearman is no longer driving. He's just a passenger, carrying over 200 kilometers per hour, with no control over direction, no control over braking, no control over impact. And what happens next is the part that even experienced engineers struggle to fully process, because the trajectory of the car was unavoidable, straight toward the barriers. No runoff, no escape, just wall. And in that final moment, everything becomes silent inside the cockpit. Not because it's calm, but because there is nothing left to do. And then, impact. Violent, instant, unforgiving. The kind of impact that compresses the body with a force most humans will never experience in their lifetime. 50 times gravity, hitting all at once. And for a split second, the entire race stopped mattering. Because now, it wasn't about positions. It wasn't about strategy. It wasn't about winning. It was about one question. Is he okay? But here's where the story takes another turn. Because what happened after the crash is what truly shook the paddock. Not the impact itself. Not the destroyed car. But the signs that something wasn't right. Because Bearman did something incredible. He got out. On his own. Which should have ended the fear. It should have been relief. But instead, it created a different kind of tension. Because as soon as he tried to walk, everything changed again. And that moment is the one that drivers cannot stop thinking about. At first, it looked like relief. He was out of the car. Standing. Alive. And in Formula 1, after an impact like that, that alone is everything. But then, something didn't match. Something felt off. Because when Bearman tried to take his first steps, he hesitated. Not mentally. Physically. His right leg didn't respond the way it should. He placed his foot down, and immediately lost balance. You can see it. That slight collapse. That moment where his body doesn't fully support him. And in that instant, every screen in the paddock became silent. Mechanics stopped moving. Engineers stopped talking. Even rival teams stopped thinking about the race. Because they all understood what that could mean. Not a crash. An injury. And in Formula 1, that changes everything. He tried again. Another step. But this time, he needed help. A marshal moved in quickly. Supporting him. Holding him steady. Guiding him away from the track. And that image, that exact image, is what triggered the real panic. Not the crash. Not the debris. Not the impact. That moment. Because drivers know their bodies. They understand pain. They understand adrenaline. But they also understand when something is wrong. And watching one of their own struggle to walk, after a 50G impact, sent a very clear message. This was serious. Now here's where it gets even more intense. Because inside the Haas garage, the reaction was immediate. Raw. Unfiltered. People staring at the screens, not speaking. Trying to process what they just saw. Because they had the data. They knew the numbers. They knew how hard that impact was. And when you combine that level of force with instability after the crash, there's only one thing that comes to mind. Internal damage. Knee. Ankle. Ligaments. Things you cannot see, but can end a season instantly. And for a few minutes, that possibility felt very real. But while the cameras focused on Bearman, something else was happening. Something quieter. But just as important. Franco Colapinto was already out of his car. Walking quickly. Straight toward the medical center. No interviews. No hesitation. Because he needed to know. What happened? And more importantly, if Bearman was okay. That tells you everything about the moment. Because this wasn't about blame. Not yet. This was about consequence. And deep down, every driver understood something uncomfortable. They had all been in similar situations. Closing speeds. Tight margins. Split-second decisions. But this felt different. Because this time, it didn't look like a normal racing mistake. It looked unpredictable. And that idea started to spread. Quietly. From garage to garage. From engineer to engineer. From driver to driver. Because if what happened to Bearman was caused by something outside of human control, then every single driver on that grid was exposed. And that's when the conversation changed. It was no longer about the crash itself. It was about the cause. And what they were about to discover next would make that concern even worse. Inside the medical center, the atmosphere was completely different. Quiet. Controlled. But tense in a way that doesn't show on camera. Because this is where reality replaces speculation. This is where numbers become injuries or relief. And for several long minutes, nobody outside knew what was happening. No updates. No confirmations. Just silence. And in Formula One, silence after a crash like that is never a good sign. Doctors began their evaluation immediately. Full checks. Lower limbs first. Knee. Ankle. Impact zones. Because in accidents like this, the danger is not always visible. It's internal. It's structural. And it can change everything in seconds. Now here's the part that adds another layer to this story. Because the data from the crash was already being reviewed at the same time, engineers were analyzing the telemetry, looking at the exact moment of impact, the forces involved, the way the energy traveled through the chassis, and what they saw confirmed just how extreme this really was. A 50G impact. Not theoretical, not estimated, measured. That means the force applied to his body was 50 times his own weight, compressed in a fraction of a second. And even in modern Formula One, that is right at the edge of what the human body can tolerate. So when doctors saw him struggling to walk, it matched the data. It made sense. And that's exactly why the concern didn't go away. It increased. Because now there were two realities happening at the same time. The visual and the physical data, both pointing to something serious. But then, the situation shifted again. Because the results of the medical scans began to come in. And what they revealed caught almost everyone off guard. No fractures. No broken bones. Nothing structurally damaged. Which, after an impact like that, feels almost impossible to believe. But it was true. What he had was a severe contusion in the right knee. A deep impact injury. Painful. Limiting. But not career-threatening. And suddenly, relief spread across the paddock. Not celebration. Not joy. But a collective release of tension. Because the worst-case scenario had been avoided. But here's where the story takes another turn. Because even with that relief, the questions didn't stop. In fact, they became sharper, more focused, more uncomfortable. Because now that Bearman was confirmed to be okay, attention shifted completely to one thing. The cause, not the outcome. The cause. And this is where the conversations behind closed doors started to align. Because the data from Colapinto's car was now under intense scrutiny. Every input, every fluctuation, every anomaly. And what they found did not point clearly to driver error. It pointed somewhere else, toward the system itself, toward energy deployment, toward something called critical harvest mode. A state where the car is no longer behaving in a stable, linear way. A state where power delivery becomes inconsistent. And more importantly, where balance can shift unexpectedly. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough to change a line. Enough to close a gap. Enough to trigger a crash. And this is where things become difficult to ignore. Because if a car can change behavior, without the driver intending it, then racing changes completely. Because now, you are not only racing other drivers. You are racing uncertainty.